Right, welcome everyone to today's Title Topics webinar. These are ALTA's free presentations we offer on issues important to title and settlement professionals. I'm Jeremy Yohe, also as Vice President of Communications, and today we've got a great webinar lined up to hopefully at the end of the day help you prevent your network security. Never thought I'd promote a webinar that would encourage you to get hacked. Obviously not hacked by a criminal, but hacked on purpose by professionals who can then help you understand where your weaknesses may be in your security. Before introducing today's speakers, I do need to touch on a few housekeeping items. A copy of today's presentation can be downloaded from the handouts section in your GoToWebinar window pane. Everyone's lines are muted during the presentation. If you do have a question, please submit them through the questions box. We'll hold a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. As an added benefit, we are recording today's presentation. After it's processed, you'll get a link to the recording tomorrow in an email. You can always find all of our archived webinars on ALTA's website, alta.org/webinars. That's alta.org/webinars. I do need to thank F&F family of companies for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars this year. Their support allows us to provide these opportunities free of charge. And with that, let me briefly introduce today's speakers. Join us, we have Alex Lauerman of Trust Foundry. Trust Foundry is an information security firm focused on network penetration testing. And we also have Ted Vallasc and Nick Sagona of Punctual Abstract. Ted is CEO and Nick is CTO, and Punctual Abstract is a national searching and abstract company. And they're going to give a great perspective on why they went through this process and how it's improved their network security. And with that, Nick, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hey, everybody. This is Nick Sagona. I'm the CTO at Punctual Abstract. Thanks for joining us. I hope everybody's having a good day. So today's topics we're going to talk about is cybersecurity. The threat is real, very much so, never more so than in 2020. We're going to talk about why you need to get hacked on purpose. I know that sounds scary, but we'll address what we mean by that. We're going to talk about the penetration testing that is done, what it is, and how it works when you do decide to get hacked and get tested to see what your network and your systems are looking like. And then we'll look inside of our own four walls and use Punctual Abstract as a case study in the penetration testing that we've done. And then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A at the end. So here we are in 2020, and obviously we've got some pretty crazy stuff going on this year, and cybersecurity, the threat is real, and very much so this year. Any opportunity like what's going on currently in the world is just a big opportunity for the bad actors out there to do some really malicious stuff. So you have to be on guard. You've probably seen these headlines that any kind of attack can cost tens of thousands to millions of dollars or more. It could be in the form of title company being hacked or imposter schemes. Obviously, you see there on the slide. We can go to the next slide. You'll see that there's situations where hackers are impersonating mortgage and title staffers to steal down payments. And then, of course, with COVID-19, that's just a pool of opportunity for hackers to come up with all kinds of schemes to steal money and perpetrate these crimes. So according to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint, as you see here on the screen, there are almost 12,000 cases reported that were in the real estate vertical, which is a pretty significant number. But because of the nature of real estate and the money that all changes hands, if we go to the next slide, you can see that they put a value to this of over $200 million. It's almost at the top of this list here. So it's a very real threat that can affect bottom lines and do some serious damage. Let's go to the next slide here. We have the U.S. Secret Service has, as of last month, actually created the Cyber Fraud task force, which the important thing to note here is they're not only going to go after the criminals and the crimes after they happen, but they're going to try to be proactive to prevent, detect, and mitigate complex cyber-enabled financial crimes. And they're going to have a network of offices throughout some of the major populated areas in the country to try to do this. So as we've talked about the real estate transaction crimes, they're not the only crimes that threaten your agency. You could be open for corporate data breach, where very sensitive and confidential data gets out into the open where you don't want it to be, or is accessed or stolen by an unauthorized person. You have malware, scareware, spyware, phishing attempts, viruses. The list goes on and on for potential attacks. You know, email is one of the biggest channels that all comes through. So it's very important to have that locked down, and that'll disable or damage your computers or the files on your computers. And then within that, the most recent one that's gotten a lot of attention over the past few years is ransomware. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about that. I've actually got an interesting story. My former place of employment before I came to Punctual Abstract, I've been here since 2016. We actually had a ransomware attack. I was closely tied to the marketing department, and one of our designers went to go open up some marketing files. It was a healthcare company that is servicing a number of healthcare providers across the country, and he went to go open up some marketing files, like Photoshop files and whatnot, to work on, and he noticed some funny file extensions. He noticed some extra files in the folder that he hadn't seen before, and he went to go open them, and they opened up and displayed an image with text on it that had the threatening ransom instructions of what to do to get access to these files back again. And so it was a very, very scary moment for our company. It was the marketing server, and so fortunately, although the marketing director would say it's very important that the marketing server is protected, and it needed to be, but it wasn't anything confidential. And at the time, I was not serving as CTO for this organization, but the CTO was able to effectively mitigate it, and we ended up destroying those drives, and we were able to restore from backup, and nothing bad happened. So we're going to talk about penetration testing, but also other steps, are important too, to make sure you have your backups in place and things like that, because that will really, really save you should you get attacked. So moving on, so cybersecurity and paying attention to cybersecurity is critical, not only for you and your operation, but for your customers. You can really give your customers peace of mind if you can provide the certifications and documentation that show that you're doing your due diligence on your own internal operations and your network infrastructure and your computer systems. Some customers may not even work with you. They may require compliance and security documentation certification that proves that you're doing your due diligence. We definitely have a number of partners that have requested that from us, and we can provide that. And it's not only a peace of mind thing, but it's a liability thing, and that they're going to want to look at, and they're not going to want to work with anybody that has any potential liability and hasn't done their homework in the areas of cybersecurity. So going on to the next slide. So yeah, it sounds scary. We said you need to get hacked on purpose. And there's a lot of bad actors out there that we just talked about, some of the things they do and the money they cost us and all the damage they do. But there's also, fortunately, a lot of good guys out there as well that work for, either contract services or firms like Trust Foundry that will provide you with the services you need to evaluate and test your network, your computer systems, and everything to see if there's any holes or vulnerabilities that need to be addressed and closed up, and they will give you that report and to which you can act on. So going on to the next slide. This is a quick little bullet list on penetration testing, which I think at this point we'll go ahead and hand off to Alex, who can take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So we'll talk a little bit about what a penetration test is and what it'll allow your company to achieve. So a penetration test is an overall look at your system's vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Our goal is to find as many flaws as possible and alert you to them before hackers find them. And then, of course, our ultimate goal is to let you fix them as well. So we'll tell you about them, but then an important part is to actually put those fixes into place. Next slide. So we'll get down in the nitty-gritty of pen testing here in the next few slides. So what is a penetration testing? It means different things to different people, there's not a formal official definition of what a penetration test is. I mean, there are some widely accepted definitions out there, but there isn't. Some companies, it can mean different things. So the generally accepted definition of a penetration test is it's a simulated attack. It should ideally be goal-based, but it at least should simulate a real attack attacking your network. So when I say goal-based, I mean maybe the goal is to get access to a certain employee's email account to simulate maybe a business email compromise type scenario, or get access to some sort of sensitive documents. Setting up goals like that is an important part of a pen test, but the key thing there is it helps simulate a real attack. So a real attack is not an audit. We do check, all pen testers will check have some kind of more checklist items that they'll work through, but that shouldn't be a majority of the testing. It's if you just want to audit perform, that's pretty easy, and it's not something that that penetration test is really set up to identify. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about the different types of penetration testing. So this slide right here is 95+% of the work that we do. So this is kind of a map of how I see our services and what we do for our customers. So running through them real quickly, and kind of in order from most popular to least popular, I would say, at least roughly. There's network and application penetration testing are the two big categories. Within network penetration testing, there is external and internal network penetration testing. A lot of times companies, like Nick mentioned, are required to have a penetration test performed, and a lot of times that would fall under the external network penetration test category. Sometimes it's not defined, sometimes they also require an internal network penetration test. It kind of depends on what that person is requiring of that company, and if they're purchasing an application from them or just assessing their overall security. But a lot of times it ends up being an external network penetration test. So that's an external network penetration test is a look at all the internet-facing assets, so mail servers, VPNs, applications, things like that. We see less infrastructure today since more people are moving to the cloud, but there's still lots of custom web applications and things, portals, things like that as well that attackers can still attack. Internal network penetration test is a look at the internal corporate network generally, where it's looking at what can an attacker do within that network. And that's really what Nick mentioned, ransomware. I know that's a concern of everybody. An internal network penetration test simulates a lot of the activities that a ransomware type attack does. So when a modern ransomware attack generally infects computers, moves throughout the whole internal network and compromises as many devices as possible just to get the ransom as high as possible. So an internal network penetration test simulates more of that lateral movement and where can an attacker get through the internal network. The application penetration testing is another major category where it's either web or mobile applications. So on the web application side, sometimes it's some sort of, we've tested a number of them. I mean, we do all sorts of application penetration testing, but we've done some for property management, appraisal management, different file transfer portals, communications between agents and clients, things like that. So there are a lot of different types of web applications that are important and in use out there, as well as mobile applications. Sometimes there's a mobile application side that goes with it as well. So we'll test those as well. On the two more things that are worth mentioning are social engineering, which generally it's email or phone social engineering. So those are us simulating attackers emailing your users and asking for credentials, something like that. The scenario, I mean, we always come up with a custom scenario that makes sense for that, whoever the organization that we're targeting. But it's either email or phone asking. Phone is sometimes just calling in and asking for a password reset or something like that, trying to act like we're an employee of the company. And then red team is typically for more mature organizations. So kind of once you feel pretty good about the above, protecting against the above attacks is when companies are typically ready for a red team engagement. And that is a red team engagement can encompass all of the above, where it's a company that comes to us and says, we think generally we have some defenses in place. We want to test them to see if they're effective. So it's up to us to determine whether we want to do a network penetration test or an application penetration test, or what what assets that we want to attack. So they don't necessarily know, just as a real attacker, they don't know if they're gonna call on the phone or attack the mail server. We would simulate the same sort of activity. Next slide. So we'll talk about how penetration testing is performed a little bit. We'll not get into the nitty-gritty details, but just to give you a high-level overview, if you were to engage a company, if you aren't familiar with penetration testing and you were to engage a company, just kind of give you an idea of what that would look like. The first important step is planning, which is generally some sort of kickoff call. And I'm going to talk high level, but the steps that apply to pretty much any company, not just ours, but a kickoff call to discuss the approach and agree upon the rules of testing, such as maybe there's something that you don't want tested, or we need to whitelist our testing IPs or something like that to prevent alerts from getting sent to your IT staff. And there's a concept of evasive versus non-evasive testing. So it's whether we're going to try to be undetected or not. 90+% of the time we'll do non-evasive testing, where we're just going to be as noisy as possible and find as many vulnerabilities as possible. But we can do evasive testing as well. But our overall goal isn't to simulate one attacker, it's to simulate kind of all attackers and find as much valuable information as possible. So the non-evasive testing is the approach that we typically take there. And then there's also a concept that the terms that you'll hear thrown out a lot called black box or gray box or white box testing. I don't use those terms because they mean different things to different companies, and I think I'd rather just say what I mean rather than using these terms that mean different things. But just to give you some idea, white box means more information transfer, and black box means we're not going to tell the pen testers much information at all. But sometimes like a white box can mean we're just conveying information, and sometimes it means we're providing source code, and sometimes it means we're providing access to the system. There's different things that it can mean. So I prefer not to use those terms, although you'll hear them quite a bit. So once the actual testing starts, we use some automated tools to perform some basic analysis. I think a lot of people think that we rely heavily on these, and we do use them because they cover a lot of ground pretty quickly, but it really only finds kind of the lowest of low-hanging fruit, and they unfortunately don't find a whole lot for us. So there's some automated tools, and we definitely leverage them where possible, but they definitely don't do the work for us, unfortunately. And if we do just if it's just an automated scan, basically with or a combination of automated scans and some assistance with that, validating those vulnerabilities, that's typically called a vulnerability assessment, which is different than a penetration test. Okay, next slide. Most of our time is spent performing manual testing. So we look at each listening service, if it's a mail server or a application, something like that out there, whatever VPN services, whatever we find out there, we're going to attack those and analyze them individually. Sometimes there's really specific vulnerabilities in a specific product, and sometimes it's just some sort of custom solution that we're going to probe for vulnerabilities. A lot of times that ends up being, there's a lot of password guessing and things like that we perform as well, just because a real attacker is will attempt those as well. And then the end result is delivering the results. Most of the time, most companies deliver those as a PDF. Some companies have like web portals that to exchange that information, but I think a lot of companies are pretty flexible on that. But in the end, you're going to get a list of, let's say, 13 things that we identified, and maybe one of them is a high severity issue, and a few of them are medium severity, and the rest are lower informational severity, and kind of a breakdown of what we identified, why it's an issue, and how we recommend fixing it. So that's it's going to be pretty standard across the board. The template format varies between company, but the general content of the report is going to be the same across all pen testing companies. Next slide. So let's talk a little about what a penetration test identifies. So like I mentioned earlier a little bit, we're going to try to find anything that would be of value to an attacker. So there's any sort of misconfiguration issues. Sometimes there's sensitive information that's accidentally exposed. Sometimes there's just weak credentials get us a long way, unfortunately. Sometimes we'll find some sort of back-end admin panel that maybe the system owners don't even know about, and we can log in there. Sometimes it's just through the main login page, but if we can get in with admin password or something like that, some sort of really easy to guess password credentials, that'll that works. Or maybe it's something a little more sophisticated than that, but ultimately we'll try hard there because attackers do as well. And then there are a long list of technical vulnerabilities that we look for. So it's everything from there's a long list. I guess I won't go into the details of what exactly those are. I think that's a little outside the scope of this, but there's a long list of things that we look for that could either allow us to access data that we shouldn't be able to access, or allow us to compromise the server completely and get access to everything on that server. So those are there are many subcategories of technical vulnerabilities there. So we were basically looking for everything kind of across the board that an attacker could exploit. Next slide. A couple quick, final things here. So to find a penetration testing provider, if you decide that you're ready for a penetration test, my just general recommendations here are to speak with a few vendors. It's generally helpful to have a few conversations just to learn from those conversations about what different people recommend. It's also beneficial to get referrals, especially from someone who understands penetration testing. So maybe there's, if someone has worked with a lot of different companies or something like that, there would be a especially valuable referral, in my opinion. It's also, I would recommend evaluating the general skill level of the company and the consultants. I guess a kind of a concerning thing for me would be if the company does 200 different things and one of those is penetration testing, to make sure they have the resources to deliver a high quality assessment. So basically just making sure, in my opinion, they should have at least someone that's full-time dedicated to penetration testing. I do this every day, and it's still tough for me to keep up with everything that changes in the industry. So someone doing it part-time, I think it would be a tough task to stay up to date. And also just general information, general review about the company, and reviewing their website, blog, LinkedIn profiles, etc. I think is helpful as well, just to understand their level of competence. Next slide. And one last thing here is that just to mention that we're talking a lot about penetration testing, but I want to remind you guys that it's not, security isn't a one-step process. Just having a penetration test performed it probably isn't going to help you immediately significantly. It's the actions that you take with those results that's going to help you. So we recommend security is going to be a continual longer term process that is going to continually improve your security over time. We mentioned things like Nick mentioned backups. I mean, that's one. If you're not doing backups, that's an issue that can be kind of security related. There's a lot of things that aren't directly identified as part of a penetration test that are important in your overall security program. So it's important to keep the overall steps in mind, and end user awareness, and those types of internal best practices, IT best practices that are also helpful. Next slide. I'm not sure if I have one more here. Okay.
Good afternoon. This is Ted Vallasc with Punctual Abstract. How's everybody doing today? When Punctual Abstract started back in 1993, we didn't think about IT and security. 27 years later, with 100 work-from-home team members and 1,000 plus vendors, we think about IT and security daily. Not only is there a risk with all the data that we exchange with our work-from-home team members and our vendors, we have other areas of risk as well, such as fake invoicing, shutting down our title production software, or putting ransomware on our files. Who we are. Punctual Abstract started back in 1993, and we're based in New Orleans metro area. We do searches nationwide, and we have boots on the ground and online access across the country. Because we're nationwide and we both have boots on the ground resources and online resources, we are at a lot of opportunities for vulnerabilities. What we do. Here's a high level of the things that we do. It's everything from residential, commercial, credit risk, and government contracts, and all the data supported for these types of searches. Here are the security steps we've taken to secure our company. The first thing we did was our SOC 1 Type 1 certification, which obviously gives us a list of all of our controls, of our processes and our workflows. We're currently preparing for our SOC 2 certification. We also perform periodic penetration tests of our systems. We integrate with our customers. We spend a lot of time integrating with our customers because this cuts down our vulnerabilities, trying to exchange information through portals, emails, and other sources. And lastly, we trained our staff. Your best defense is your team members. Make sure they understand your security steps and make sure you limit and monitor their access. How to prepare. Preparation is very easy. We gave them our IP addresses. We set the goals. Other than that, there wasn't much preparation, and they got started. It's simple as that. The penetration test results. Yeah, so we got a detailed report. It was about 40 pages long. It's easy to read. It covers the definitions, the expectations. Then it gives you a list of your vulnerabilities from critical down to low, with the recommendations to eliminate these vulnerabilities going forward. So once we have our vulnerabilities, it's up to our team's responsibilities to remedy and cure those vulnerabilities. And then we run the test again. We fix the issues. If we didn't fix the issue, we run the test again, and then we fix the issues. What to expect? Like I said, the process was very simple for us to administer. We provided our IP addresses. They hacked us. They gave us our vulnerabilities. Nick and team fixed it. They hacked our environment again to make sure Nick fixed everything, and then everything was processed, and we were good to go. So you need to get started. What the penetration test might find, or what we found in our situation. We found that we had some maybe outdated equipment, outdated software, and open ports of other access points. How often should you perform a penetration test? Ideally, you should do a penetration test every quarter, but your budgets may not allow you to do one every quarter. So our recommendation is that you do one at least yearly, or anytime you do any big system change to your workflows. I thank everybody for their time today. I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy for any questions.
All right, Ted. Well, thanks. You made it seem rather simple on how you implemented it and got your staff up to speed. But as you said, we're going to hold some time for Q&A. Fill up the questions box. We'll pitch them over to Ted and Nick from a title company perspective on how they implemented it, and maybe anything technical we'll toss to Alex. First question we had come in already. What's an SOC? What's a SOC? Someone wants to take that one.
So this is Ted. So a SOC is a third-party audit by a CPA firm to test your controls, and the controls being from your human resources and your hiring controls to your security controls to the way you manage your documentation controls. So it's a third-party audit, like I said, from a CPA firm that comes on and does this type of testing. As you start to expand and work with the bigger banks, they will require that you have a SOC 1 or a SOC 2. A SOC 1 is more of an entry-level audit and is easier to administer and complete. A SOC 2 has more control access points that they look at and does take more to complete.
All right, good explanation for that. We are getting some more questions rolling in. One asked, how do you do a penetration test? Just recommend kind of reviewing the slides and seeing how Ted and his team approached it, and then as Alex mentioned, talk to a few vendors, vet them, make sure they're experts in penetration testing, and from there after you have a plan. Question who asks if penetration testing includes cloud company use such as Office 365. So
yeah, I can handle that one. So yeah, good question. So it does. There's some things that we can and can't do from a penetration testing perspective. We're not going to attack Microsoft's assets, things that they own without necessarily having permission. So we do a lot of cloud penetration testing based on assets that are hosted in the cloud, and we use some simulate a real attacker, which they're a lot of times going to phish Office 365 credentials, or there are also some newer techniques that attackers are using to gain access to Office 365 accounts. So we definitely do that type of testing, and it's more and more of that, but it's not we're not just testing Office 365 itself, because I mean there's little value in that, and it's Microsoft is already performing that testing as well. So our goal is to kind of test your use of those cloud providers in some cases, not the cloud provider itself.
Follow-up question, and this may just come down to a company's what they want to test more. The question is, what percentage of testing is internal or behind the firewall?
So the external testing is typically the first step. Like if a company hasn't done any testing before, a lot of times they start out with external testing, and then internal testing is more work. It's probably on average a couple times the amount of effort, but it's less common that companies need that. So it's it's overall probably about an even breakdown, because there's a third of the companies maybe are doing the external testing, but it takes 3 times as much time. Just those are some very rough numbers, but there's some trade-off there. It's rarer but increased effort.
Maybe for Alex or Ted, and as you've done these, where is the highest vulnerability? We've done cybersecurity webinars in the past, and is it your employees, are they the weakest link? Is it weak passwords? Where on average is the highest vulnerability for a company?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the company and how they're set up. If they're all cloud-based or something like that, that might change things a little bit. So there's not just one place that always is always the weakest link. Like maybe if they have a large customer support staff or something like that, and are handling a lot of inbound calls, and that might be the weakest link there. But I would say between although we try to pride ourselves in finding the most technically sophisticated things that we can, a lot of times it's the weak credentials or reused credentials and phishing type attacks. People basically giving us their passwords. And then my opinion on that is that a lot of those attacks are hard to stop completely or impossible to stop completely. But it's important to have the right response protections and response in place. Like 2-factor authentication is a solid step towards preventing someone from just getting in with a weak password. Having 2-factor authentication across the board and some kind of general IT processes and controls to prevent things from being attacker from getting the keys to the kingdom by asking the user for one thing is important. On the phone side, just making sure users are fully authenticated or validated acceptably before, like maybe for IT support, making sure you're fully validating who the user is, or maybe not going through some out-of-band process to provide password resets, things like that. Those are another big weak link. So there's a few areas there, but I think it's a lot of times it's the easier stuff that gets us a long way. It's not the really the server patching and stuff like that is important, but it doesn't. It's a lot of times we can get in with something just some by guessing a weak password.
And sure, everyone would agree. We're all this nonstop barrage of phishing emails. And also, I don't even know, 20 or 30 a day, just random. Are you in the office? Can we connect? And it looks like it's from our CEO, or just email from a legend. Hey, what's the status of this transaction? Or this device closing disclosure. So I guess it's a lot more vigilance on keeping your employee, right, Ted?
Sorry, your phone was breaking up on that. Can you paraphrase real quick?
I was talking about kind of the importance of keeping your employees trained, just being mindful and watchful of phishing emails.
Yeah, so we do training at the time of hire, and then we do recertification annually, and then we are doing internal uh, kind of penetration testing as well to try and fool our team members outside of the third-party services that we get from Trust Foundry. So we're actively keeping our employees on their toes because they click on one link accidentally, and the lights could be off.
Did you tell them beforehand when you're doing testing, or is it more of a surprise?
So no, we speak about the importance of it at day one on new hires. So we tell them, hey, we explain the importance and we explain what we do. Although they have no idea if we're going to administer or try it next week Thursday or 3 weeks from now. So yeah, we don't want to tell the team because just like if you tell them, then they're going to act differently. So we want everyone to have their guard down, just be doing their normal activities to see if during normal activities there's any vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So Ted, as you've done these, maybe the first one, if you could, recollect back when you did the first penetration testing, would you mind, sharing, or what were some of the vulnerabilities and holes that you found?
I mean, I've done multiple penetration tests now, so I guess I can't speak to this or that. I've looked at so many. As Alex stated, he kind of went over the most reoccurring situations that companies run into, but I guess I cannot speak off the top of my cuff to any direct example.
I can. This is Nick here. I can jump in. I mean, just to give you a quick summary for the people on the webinar here. One of the main things for us in one of our first pen test reports was, we had, I believe it was some software and some firmware that was a bit outdated and needed to be updated to close. When software and firmware gets updated, they're closing holes and bugs that could potentially be vulnerabilities. So we update to the recommended versions, and then on top of that, they'll do port scans and say, hey, these ports are open that are vulnerable, that have can give pathways into your systems. You should close these up. So then our IT team closes those ports. Our DevOps team updates the software on where it needs to be, and we rerun the tests like we talked about, and then those go off the list, and we get a green light in those areas, and we can move forward. So it's kind of a real high level overview of some of the things that we addressed in some of our first pen test reports.
So what you're saying, Nick, is when I get that notification I have a software update, I should probably do that.
Yeah, your IT team in your company really needs to have it streamlined for you, so the things auto update your software, your operating systems, and things like that. So you stay as up to date as possible, because that's what Microsoft and if anybody's on Apple or any other operating systems, they're pushing these updates out to, a lot of them are to close security vulnerabilities, and not just to update the software and give you a new feature, but also to close security vulnerabilities. So it's very important to stay up to date on your users' desktops and your servers and any other software, any other devices that have operating systems on them.
Kind of on that same vein, as far as patches and updates, question is, how important are software patches to do, and when do you consider a computer obsolete? So when should they be replaced?
Well, speaking specifically to Microsoft, Windows, they're pretty good about, letting you know when operating system is no longer supported and it's officially end of life. And, one of the projects we have right now is clearing off. I think we got about 5 or 6 older Windows 7 machines on our network that just have, they have to go because they're not supported anymore. They're not getting any more updates. And if there's any other bugs or holes or vulnerabilities found in Windows 7, having those on the network that, those, it can be publicly accessed when they go out into the wild is a vulnerability. So, you just need to follow suit with what the recommendations are from the companies, the vendors that provide you, the Microsofts of the world or the Apples of the world, and they provide you the direction to say, hey, don't use this anymore, move to the next version. It's important that you do that. Even though it can be a challenge and it can be difficult and it can cause headaches at times, it's important that you stay up to date with everything.
Yeah, one example is Flash won't be supported at the end of the year, so.
Yeah, that's a long time coming. They fought the good fight, but that's, yeah. And look, very, very early in my career, I was in more of a multimedia Flash studio in the early 2000s, and that was the hot thing, right? And it served its purpose. We did a lot of great work with it, but you know, a long time ago, it got passed up for HTML5 and everything, and where we're at now with JavaScript and CSS and what you can do on the web. So it's long past time to put that to bed. So.
Maybe on a practical level, you know, when do you do the testing? You know, if there's a lot hitting your server during the workday, does that slow your server down, bog down, or is this?
Yes, you definitely want to schedule that out in a way that and you can work with your vendor, your like Alex, and then work with us to schedule a time, because I think they did kind of do a quick. I think we got caught where it was like we're in the middle of the day and did a little something, and we're like, whoa, something's slowing us down, and they're like, oh, that was us, and it's like, yeah, let's schedule this out. You know, so you're definitely going to want to schedule that. You maybe potentially after hours, because it could be, you know, it could slow down your systems.
Yeah, definitely need to comment on that. And also, you know, its members range from small, you know, single person, single practitioner shops to, you know, large national operations. You know, and the ability for if you're a small shop to, you know, manage this or afford it, you know, it is a big question. So, what is kind of the cost to do the penetration test? Is it kind of a range you could talk about?
Yeah, I can answer that. So it varies, of course, depending on who's performing the testing. There's a lot of variation in kind of scope as well. So just like with any project, some people might think it's might spend more time on it and be more thorough, or maybe, you know, allocate more time, and the cost will vary there as well. So the cost, it definitely varies depending on just how much you want tested. Like on that slide, if you have, you know, if you want all the boxes checked, internal network penetration test, external network penetration test, phishing, social engineering, application testing, etc. You know, it can be easily tens of thousands of dollars quickly. A small test is generally several $1,000s. It just kind of depends on the exact size of the organization. I think, you know, we've done a couple that are just like single offices, external network penetration tests that are on the very low end there. And then we do quite a few that are just medium-sized offices that are in the, I guess, the 4-figure range, just depending on the size of the amount of work that needs to be done. I think hopefully I gave you some guidance there on, but you know, I don't know what the industry average is, but for making some assumptions about the people on this call, I would say, or the types of companies that are on this call, I'd say a lot of them are going to be in the, you know, the $2,000 to $7,000 range, something like that, just depending on how large your company is.
And then, you know, we don't get your question, you know, if you want to have a follow-up there, all the speakers' contact info, their emails right there on the slide, so feel free to reach out. If you do need a copy of the slide deck, you can download it from the handouts section, and it will also be on Alta's website, where all the webinar recordings are found, alta.org/webinars. Got one more question in the Q&A box right now, and question about if you're compromised, have a breach, would you still alert the FBI as well as the banks involved? Yes and yes, and also, you know, wire transfer fraud, recommend, you know, any kind of fraud, recommend filling out a report on ic3.gov. Right, guys?
Yeah.
Right.
I agree. That's not my. I don't do much work on that, or any work on the incident response side. But yeah, I think, you know, keeping everybody alerted would be ideal.
Yeah, it definitely is. As as soon as you are, learn of a compromise, you definitely want to reach out to the appropriate parties as soon as you can. Just a reminder, we are kind of wrapping up. If you do have any other questions, submit them in the questions box. Again, as a reminder, if you missed that parts of today's webinar, others on your staff would benefit from listening. And this is being recorded, and you'll get an email with a link to the recording tomorrow. And as I mentioned, you can always check out all of our webinars, recordings on Alta's website, alta.org/webinars. Looking ahead, next month, our next webinar will dig into leasing issues on Native American lands. So keep an eye out for registration information for that webinar. And speakers, anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up? All right.
I don't have anything, no.
All right. Well, thank you all for taking some time today. And with that, that will bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. We'd like to thank FNF Family of Companies once again for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.